Hello everyone, this is a lecture on what research actually is, and I'm not talking about scientific research at a professional level, but research as far as an undergraduate or master student is concerned, particularly in the areas of product and industrial design. I am acknowledging here that I have been using some of the material of the University of Central England in Birmingham that I found off the web. I didn't use it directly, I was only reflecting on it. So let's go through this first. I remember myself when I first started studying product design and people started talking about the importance of research. I thought, oh my God, now I'm going to be into all this dry stuff. But actually, it isn't all that dry. And it can actually be quite fun when you're getting strategic about it. So first of all, let's look at what we are really trying to accomplish with our research. What is this thing? There is a definition that I found here. First and foremost, research is what they call a studious inquiry or examination. And what you're doing there is you're discovering and interpreting facts. You may even find yourself revising accepted theories. And that is basically that definition. What goes into it? Well, when you're researching, you need to keep a few things in mind. First and foremost, research is a very formal thing. So it's not something you can just go and do without any initial thought. You need to plan this. So you need to be doing your homework before you set out and then follow procedure. You're doing this in order to increase the stock of knowledge. What we mean by that is a lot of stuff is already known. And we don't mean by you. We mean generally. The world knows a lot of things. And actually, the internet makes this very accessible to us now. Now, when you research, what you really want to do is you want to find out the stuff that you cannot read up on yet. So the trick is to find out what the stock of knowledge is, what is already known, what do other people already know. People who count, that is. I'm not talking about asking your sister or something. It's about finding out who the main authority on something is and what they have written most recently, and that should quite conveniently summarize where things are at with regards to a certain topic. And that's what you build on in your research, okay? You find out everything that is known, and then you add to that the thing that they don't know yet. This is all about facts, okay? You will never be asked about your impressions or your hunches. Research is entirely about facts. And you may find yourself confirming what has been found before, or perhaps even questioning it. Research that really means something should try to address a problem. We'll get to the research problem part in a minute. And you may well find that whatever you're finding out is supporting a theory, or if not, it may even bring up a new theory. So to get going as a researcher, you will need to identify a research problem. If you're a designer, you have a design brief that you can start with, which hopefully explains a problem that is to be solved by the design project. Step number 2 is you go and find literature. So you find things that have been written or published in other ways by people who matter, and then you review that, which means you're writing a critical analysis of what they have said and where that leaves you. You will also need to specify the purpose of your research, what you're doing it for. You need to determine your research question. We're going to look into what the research question is in a little while here. And as you do all this, collect data along the way. Collect data, collect data, collect data. That means ISBN numbers, things people might say, things people might write, statistical data that you find, stuff like that. Finally, you analyze and interpret your data. And in the end, you write it all up in a report. And that report should not just state what happened, but you should evaluate this. You should, pretty much write your own thoughts on what you have seen and what that means. Right, so this is the rough overview. I'm going to go into detail as we go. So, step 1 out of 7. There will be 7 chapters to this research thing, each one with several slides, so please bear with me. This is a lengthy thing, I realize this. If you're ever bored, nobody stops you to just hit the pause button and go for a drink, and then come back, or fast forward to the next thing that might interest you. So this chapter here is all about the research problem. The research problem is something you can find or formulate in 2 ways. Either you have a design brief, and hopefully you know what a design brief is. Maybe your lecturer gave you one, maybe you wrote one, or if you're in industry, somebody would have presented you with one. The superior would have done that normally, team leader or somebody. Or B, you identify an initial topic area of interest for yourself. And I'm writing initial here because it's widely acknowledged that you may need to be flexible about your topic, and it may change as you find out more stuff. That's just in the nature of these things. So that is the research problem and how you formulate it. Next, you start your literature search. Now that you know what the problem is that you're looking into, you should be able to create yourself a list of keywords and just have a go. Here's how it should be done. So first, you really define that research question. We have just done that before. The research question should be fairly specific. So if you make yourself let's use a wicked problem. Let's say we are trying to resolve an aspect about living in Brazil. Okay, I think the worst thing you can do is make it wide open, because if you're going to make this about poverty in Brazil, wow, you're going to have yourself researching and writing probably for the next 200 years. So you really need to be very specific here, and it could be something as simple as the role of plastic packaging in contributing to child poverty in Brazil. How about that? You're defining the purpose of that research. Perhaps the purpose is to improve the understanding of a certain aspect that has not been highlighted yet, such as the role of plastic packaging in child poverty in Brazil. And then you're making yourself a nice long list of keywords. Keywords, synonyms, maybe there are variations in spelling, but the longer your list is, the better. And I would really set aside some time and a good cup of coffee to do this, because you'd be amazed how helpful that can be. State what you already know about the topic. There is a good chance that you've chosen your topic because you're fairly knowledgeable about it. And that can create a good initial body of text for you that you could perhaps even use as an introduction, which you may want to add to once you have actually researched your literature properly. And you're going to define the scope of this. So if this is going to be about child poverty in Brazil, ask yourself, do you want to include child poverty in Brazil in the 1930s? Or is it more relevant that we check out the years 2005 to the present? Your choice. But honestly, if you're going to try and make a difference to the problem, then I'd say forget the 1930s. They may no longer have much bearing on what's happening at the moment. So before you run away and grab books from the library, let's look at what actually are useful sources of literature. Keeping in mind here that my audience is probably mostly from the world of product design, industrial design, and similar areas, I would still say the strongest literature you can get is journal articles, scientifically written journal articles on Google Scholar. I find Google Scholar as of this date, 2017, a very good source for things that have been written recently. And I think one thing you may want to keep in mind about this is that recently written stuff saves you a lot of work because it has to take into account everything that was written before. So don't be overzealous thinking, yeah, I'm going to collect everything that has been written in the last 15 years. You don't have to do that because any good scientific writer would have taken into account what has already been written, and they would have based their work on that, which is the whole beauty of reading scientific journals. Whenever a brand new article comes out in a certain area, you can rest assured pretty much that that takes into account everything that was written before and will reflect on that. So your body of literature may be much smaller than you think. You may be putting in your keywords and you're thinking, oh, wow, yeah, 15 articles on this. But then you're looking at the years these were written in and you realize that maybe only the last two mean anything because the other are too old and are actually mentioned and referenced and quoted in the new ones. Okay. For us designers, we have a few extra things that we can count as literature. Patents, for example. You can do patent searches online very conveniently and check out what kinds of objects exist, what kinds of systems, what kinds of services, what kinds of products. That is as good as a peer-reviewed thing, a patent, because it is a peer-reviewed thing. Peer-reviewed, by the way, means that people who understand this subject have officially signed it off, endorsed it, if you will, let it go through as non-bullshit. So that is what a patent is. It has gone through a thorough investigation and evaluation by a patent attorney, and it's considered new enough. Actual products that you find on the shelves, in the catalogs, on the market, are considered literature for a product designer. So if your research is to cover plastic packaging, well, look at the plastic packaging that you get out there. And any systems that might be in circulation. It could happen to you as a researcher that you find no literature. What do we do then? I mean, is that a problem? I have colleagues who are like, oh, great, nothing exists on this yet. Actually, that's not a good thing because you will have to build all the credibility yourself if you don't find literature. So it's very much in your interest to find at least something. Because the very sad truth about literature and research is if you have no literature, technically you have no project because you simply cannot rely on anything else. You cannot, You cannot use any benchmarks. It's just your voice out there. And who are you? You know? So try to find something, and it can be done. You can find literature even when there seems to be no literature. Here's what I tend to do: search with different keywords, which is why I said before, make yourself a nice long list of keywords, even if it takes 2 cups of coffee. Discover all the synonyms, discover all the variations in spelling. And in this day and age, with Google Translate, there's simply no reason why you shouldn't try other languages. Yeah, if you can't find it in English, perhaps there's something in Japanese or in Swedish or in German, who knows? And if even that doesn't help, try a similar context. Yeah, it may be perfectly possible that plastic packaging and child poverty have been investigated not in Brazil but in India. Now, there, perhaps you can find something there. Maybe it's not plastic packaging, but it might be, I don't know, something else. You do the thinking, okay? It's yours. Good, so that concludes the literature search. If you've gone through this successfully, you should now have a little pile of useful bits and things that other scientists have written and published, and that gives you your literature. So the next thing to do is to review that literature. And that means we are pretty much summarizing, synthesizing, analyzing, evaluating all that stuff that we have put in that stack next to us. What really is known about the subject, and we're not talking generic terms. We're talking about fairly advanced stuff here now. So what really do we know about the effect of plastic packaging on child poverty in Brazil? Has somebody written something on that? What have they written? What are the gaps? Can you see that there are certain things that have never even been touched on in this regard? What is not written, I think, is what we want to know. And make these notes to yourself. What is the literature not answering? What questions does the literature bring up and doesn't answer, in your opinion? Have these other researchers even been so nice and pointed out things that should still be investigated? You'll find that a good journal article usually concludes with a suggestion or a recommendation for further work to be done or for further research to be done. So if you found a few good articles, go straight to the end of them and see what these authors suggest. There might be your cues right there. One thing you may find out pretty much before you do anything like this, actually, is who the famous researchers are in the area that you're investigating. Is there anybody who has written prolifically? And if so, make sure you definitely include their stuff. You may not want to limit it to them, but you cannot get away with not mentioning them. So make sure you know who they are, okay? Also find out if all the people who are writing about this topic see it in the same light. It's perfectly possible that they disagree with each other. So if there is a debate going on, if some people are saying, no, plastic packaging means absolutely nothing for child poverty in Brazil, and others are saying, but it's a key element of it. Well, you will want to become aware of that by reading this stuff and make sure you identify who occupies these opposite positions and what their views are. So that is what I just said. What are the aspects that have generated debate on the topic, if there is one? Obviously, if there is a debate on the topic, if people don't agree on it, then it will probably make for a more interesting writing, but it's also going to make your topic a little less straightforward. So be realistic. Could it be that clear problems were identified by the other scientists? If so, nice. Make sure you make yourself a list of what they are, because you need to refer to them in your writing of your literature review. It is actually exactly what you're looking for. Make sure you develop an understanding of where you're going to take your project based on the stuff that you have been reading. Because you may find out that a lot of the things that you might have hoped to do before you started have already been done or may not work. So in the course of writing a literature review, you may want to start pointing out where your project will need to go. Also find out where it's at the moment regarding the progress. Could it be that some researchers are at the moment of writing this already undertaking a research that may conclude the problem? You'll want to know how close to a solution this currently is. And finally, list all the information that you got. So if you got books, get their ISBN numbers. If you got online stuff, get the URLs. If you did interviews, keep the transcripts. Now we have two different kinds of document that we might be writing, a dissertation or a research report. If it's a dissertation, it is a more general thing. You might find yourself writing dissertations at bachelor level, at master level. And there, I mean, speaking as a lecturer here, I can tell you honestly what we're doing in these. We want to see that you have understand this topic. So basically, you are writing a little treatise. You're writing a general overview of something without really adding to the knowledge too much. Yeah, you don't need to find a new theory or anything like that in a dissertation. What we want to see is that you're able to work your way through a reasonably complex body of knowledge and draw your own conclusions from it. That's a dissertation. Or you do a research report, and in a research report, we will want to see that it is extremely current. So if it's recent and if it's major work, then it's got to be in there. Okay, and the research report is something you may be doing as part of your PhD or when you're a researcher, professional researcher. What are we doing the literature review for? So there are 4 reasons why we're actually doing these. First of all, we are establishing what is known. We basically map out the situation on a particular topic as it is. We're saying this is our starting point, this is known, this is what we build on. You're also analyzing how good that is. It may well be that the existing knowledge is weak or is vague or doesn't answer all the questions, and you should quite early on be ready to make that judgment. Keep in mind that you also have a reader who hopes to learn something. You know, I've seen a lot of researchers who write in ways that make you think, wow, they don't even want to be understood. They want to confuse. And even though it's done a lot, I beg you, don't do that, because, you know, in essence, we researchers write because we want to share knowledge. So always keep in mind that somebody will be reading this. Be nice to them. Bring the newspaper to them like the little dog here, you know. So write nicely, and even if you may find that much of the work that you may be looking at will be written coldly and in ways that don't make it easy to understand, that's not considered a good thing, okay? Nobody Nobody respects people who write in such convoluted ways that you don't get it. You don't need to dazzle, just be nice. And you may also, of course, bring out the different perspectives and viewpoints that exist by the different contributors. So it's a nice overview of saying, well, we have found these three people who have written on this topic, and they take distinctly different takes on it, and here's what they are, right? Good. So this is what we do in the literature review. We are accomplishing a few different things with this. We are finding out what is known. We are identifying potential relationships between concepts. I hope this makes sense to you. We are also trying to identify a hypothesis that can be researched, such as gravity makes the apple fall down. That's a hypothesis, right? So we're trying to arrive at one clear thought forward for us that serves as our vehicle for the research project, the hypothesis. And we should be able to form one based on what we have read in the literature. We should also understand the evaluations of other scientists of the key concepts, so we should understand what all these concepts mean that are compiled in our literature. We should be aware of all the sources that the other researchers have used, which is very easy. You just need to look in their appendix. And you may want to be able to create a few ideas for other research projects that spin off of this one. You may find that to conduct one research project, you may have to conduct a few other little experiments that you didn't think you had to, just to verify that this or that actually works. And you should, in theory, be able to say how important your work is. So you're saying something about the positioning of your project among the work of the other projects, such as, are you only contributing lightly to the understanding of this, or are you contributing a major breakthrough understanding? Have you found the governing dynamics behind plastic packaging and how you can stop child poverty entirely by doing something with plastic packaging? That kind of assessment is probably not as hard to make as you think, because you know in the end what you have done and how much of a help it is going to be. So that's literature review. Here's something called the research purpose. If you're filling out a form, if you're a researcher, they will ask you for the research purpose. And you have a few options here, and you could tick all these boxes. You could say that you are researching in order to increase the stock of knowledge, which means just make sure the world knows more about this topic than it did before. And if you do that well, they will. You could do it to establish facts or to confirm facts. It could be something as simple as, there is the notion out there that plastic packaging contributes to child poverty in Brazil. Is it true? And your research might simply be based on that. You will find out whether plastic packaging in Brazil actually contributes to child poverty or not. And if it doesn't, well, then that's the outcome of your paper. You write, no, it doesn't. Case closed. This may mean that you are either reaffirming or contradicting the results of previous work done by other scientists. And it may well be that you help solve new or existing problems in this way. And then there might be theories that you're trying to support or theories that you're trying to develop. So all this could be the purpose of your research. And if you have a form in front of you where they ask you about that, use all that apply and perhaps explain how you see that happening. So that is your research purpose dealt with. The research question, which is a very important bit. Let's look at that. Obviously, it should interest you because you're going to be with it for a while, depending on how long your project is. If it's your research for your PhD, well, you may be in it for 3 to 8 years. So what you want of that question is that it is clear, it is focused, and you might be surprised, it should be complex enough to actually give you something to go on. Let's see what we mean by these things. A clear research question is one that is able to give you something to go on for online searches. I'm not saying you'll only do online searches, but it's where you start and it's an important part of research. So make sure that you use exactly the right words that will yield stuff on Google, if you will. It should be focused, and it should be focused to the point where you can hope to conclude the topic in the time that you have. So like I said before, if you are making your research child poverty in Brazil, you will write for 200 years. So you need to write the relationship or the effect of plastic packaging on child poverty in Brazil. That's reasonably concise, okay? And it shouldn't be a question that can be answered yes or no. So it should not be, is there a correlation between plastic packaging and child poverty in Brazil? Should not be that, okay? It should be the correlation between child poverty and plastic packaging in Brazil. I hope you see that difference. So you shouldn't be able to just answer it yes or no. You should use a complete sentence to write your research question, and it doesn't actually need to have a question mark at the end. That is something a lot of people get wrong. You need to be specific in it, very specific, and it should have a size that you can manage. Let's see how you can develop your research question. It may seem like a lot of effort to go into just a simple question, but when you consider how long you will have to deal with this thing, you will want to spend some quality time formulating your research question well. So what helps? I think this will be especially helpful for PhD students who are able to choose their own topic, or for master students who are writing that. You should probably care about the topic personally, although it has to be said, whenever I did that, I ended up no longer caring about the topic when it was over. So be very careful. You may find out more than you wish you had. And you may lose your interest in it because of that at the end. So it's a therapeutic kind of thing to do, perhaps, with something. Or it should be something you are very curious about, genuinely curious about. Maybe you have been curious about this for years and years and have been finding yourself searching it in databases for years. Well, if that is the case, then you might have a pretty promising candidate on your hands. You've already proven that you have the tenacity and that it can hold your interest. The next thing is do a bit of preliminary research on that topic, because what you want to avoid is somebody else having already done what you want to do. Luckily, Uncle Google can totally help you with that these days. So I think what I would do in this case is spell out a few potential titles of your work and use them for a Google search, see what comes up. If somebody has already written something or created a solution to what you're hoping to do, well, time to reconsider. You will need to know who you're writing this for, and you don't have much of a choice in this. It sounds like it, but you don't. Because really, what you're doing is, as soon as you choose a topic and a research area, you are writing for the people who are invested in that research area. So if you're in the research area of child poverty, then these people will be your audience. This stuff is going to be written by UN people, WHO people, people who know this stuff, and they will want you to use a certain terminology. They will expect you to have certain background knowledge. So just imagine who the people are who will take an interest in what you have written. Professional interest, okay? And then you need to create yourself a good long catalog of questions. How questions and why questions, such as how does this work? How is plastic packaging perceived by street children in Brazil? How does it get to them? How do they get rid of it? How do they acquire the goods inside? And so on. And then even very basic why questions. Why are street children in Brazil crazy about plastic stuff? And so on. And then you evaluate your research question once you have it, using all these criteria that we've looked at on this page and on the page before. Will it be good enough? And can you stand looking at it long enough? Do you see yourself happy with this for a few years, if you have to be? I'll show you some examples here now of clear and unclear research questions. An unclear research question here might be, why is online education in China problematic? It's very unclear because we don't even know what they mean by problematic. So it's not specific enough, it's not complex enough. A better way to write this would be this. How are online users experiencing or addressing degree accreditation issues on such online education sites as Remicom or OnBridge? They don't seem to have to do anything to do with each other, these two questions, do they? But the fact is, the second one here, the clear research question, is already taking into account a lot of specifics. So Remicom and OnBridge here would be Chinese online education providers. And we have already addressed in our headline that some of the big issues that make online education in China problematic are degree accreditation issues. I hope you see what I've done there. So you have basically loaded the clear research question with a lot of specific knowledge that comes from your literature review. And the unclear research question up there. It's high school stuff. You don't want to touch that. Okay, this is just crazy weak. The unclear question also doesn't suggest what kinds of problems these sites are causing. The clear one does. It actually alludes here to accreditation. And also, the unclear question here assumes that the word problems or problematic is perfectly clear to everybody. Well, actually, it's not. You need to be specific about what you mean by that. And all this needs to go into your research question. And as you can see here, the research question is neither punchy nor sexy. It's a long, cumbersome, weird thing that will confuse the hell out of anybody who doesn't have knowledge of this subject. And that's fine, because It's a formula, okay? Now, an unfocused research question is also something like, what is the effect on the environment from global warming? Much better would be, how is glacial melting affecting penguins in Antarctica? So this is exactly the same thing as we did on the previous slide. We have loaded this line with specific information. So up here, the unfocused research question is too broad, and you simply cannot answer that in a college level paper unless the college level paper has 5,000 pages and you have 20 years to write it. This is just too much stuff to take into account. And we don't do research to write about a lot of things. We do research to understand a very small thing to the deepest possible level. Okay? Another research question that is too simple, way too simple. Diabetes in China. Oh God, if you see that, I mean, you stand no hope of getting anywhere with a research question like that. Much better would be this. What are common traits of those suffering from diabetes in China, and how can these commonalities be used to aid the medical community in prevention of the disease? This is good, yeah. But the problem with the simple version is you can look this up online, and you just come out with a few factual sentences, and that's it. There is no depth to it. You're not really adding to the stock of knowledge. You're not surprising anybody with something new that you have found out through hard work. So if you can find the answer with a Google search, it's probably not good enough for a research question. Okay? I hope that explained the aspect of research questions well enough for you. Let's look at the data gathering that you need to do when you research. When you're gathering your data, you're doing all these things. All of these words here are perfectly permitted and good methods. Surveys, polls, interviews, measurements, readings, recordings, questionnaires, examinations, test rigs, experimental processes, prototypes, and study models, and there may even be others that I haven't listed. So with this, you first and foremost create your research design so that you can start your data gathering. And you need to be aware that there are two different kinds of research that you can do. You can either do qualitative research or quantitative research. Let's look at the difference between these two types. The qualitative research asks how. You will not find yourself quantifying or measuring anything, it just uses a theme. So you're doing this in order to perhaps explore the behavior of someone or something and why it occurs. You may use this as a method to explore things that aren't understood, and you will probably find that this usually serves as a basis for quantitative research a little later on. So it's good to start your research with this. It's a nice, somewhat superficial thing, but it doesn't give you figures and really, and it doesn't give you anything that you can measure. The quantitative research is much harder and stronger, and it basically means you're coming up with figures, with numbers. And you can use this to test a hypothesis. So if you're going to make strong research, set up your experiments in such a way that you have stuff to measure, and you will have quantitative research then, and it will be strong. The difference between primary and secondary data is also interesting to understand. It's a very misleading thing. If you haven't done research before, you may be inclined to think that primary is always better, but it's not. Okay, so look at this. I've spelled it out here for you. Primary data are collected specifically for the research. That means these could be interviews that you undertake with people. And this is the data that you personally collect. Now, I know that maybe in high school you might have been told that this is the hot shit. This is the thing to do. Well, yeah, there is a time and place for it, but unfortunately it is considered inferior to secondary data. Secondary data are considered much better. Why is that? Well, that's because secondary data should be coming from sources that have been through a peer-reviewed process. Your secondary data, that is what other scientists have already published, and that means it comes from work that has been looked at already by a lot of different people who have all approved of it and who have all recognized this as correct. And it may also mean that the data are based on far greater sampling sizes than you may have available. Yeah, it's nice that you've asked 13 people in the pedestrian precinct in Nottingham, but perhaps the WHO has data from 2 billion people that were gathered over 14 years. Now, what's better? If you can get secondary data, it is better. And I tend to tell my students, always get your secondary data first because it helps you find out where things are at, and only get your primary data by the time you have identified the gaps in the research, because that's the only place where it makes sense to go collecting. Okay, once you found out what the secondary data doesn't cover, that's when you can go out and get your primary data to find out the bits that are missing. We have these three different kinds of research methods that we can use. The so-called exploratory research helps identify and define a problem. The constructive research then goes a step further and actually tests theories and may even propose a solution to a problem. And the empirical research tests the feasibility of a solution using empirical evidence. So this may be a little weaker, and there are a lot of institutions that are not interested in empirical research, although I have to admit I think empirical research is the most fun. And as a design student or as a designer, it is probably the thing that you will do the most of. I can almost say certainly that there is no such thing as a good design project that doesn't include empirical research, where you try how stuff, if your solution works, and how you quantify that. So this is gathering of data in a nutshell. We have all these data, a big pile of data. We need to analyze them and we need to interpret them. As you can see, we're at step 6 out of 7, so we're getting pretty close here to our conclusion. So now that we have all these data that we have collected, we need to analyze. And it's surprisingly simple. If you have quantitative research data, you need to get at them with statistical tools and mathematics. Mathematics are the only way to deal with numbers, I find. And statistics, obviously, to put them in context. Or if they're qualitative data, you have comparisons, which require some good comparative writing. And that's already the analysis and interpretation of data done and dusted. Now the final step, probably the one that you will want to invest the most time in, because that is where you make everything visible. Your report. This could be your PhD thesis, this could be your research report, this could be your master dissertation, whatever it may be. here are the steps on how it's done. Let's just say it's a written and bound thesis, and it's a degree presentation. Okay. One thing that you should definitely do is write all the time from the first day. Okay. Um, there are some people who go, yeah, first I'll do my research and then I'll write it all up. These people are going to be in hell because you will forget stuff. You will stop remembering how you actually sorry, you may forget how you felt about stuff. You may forget little bits of inspiration that popped up along the way. Write a page every day minimum, and you should be okay. And when you write, you have a few things to consider. You'll want to choose your words very carefully. And what I mean by that is what you write is written and it stands forever. And you may look at this 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and you may go, my God, couldn't I think of a more polished way of putting that? Or worse, peers, colleagues, other researchers may read what you've written and they may simply find your choice of word poor or teenager like or populist or whatever. So, with careful writing, I mean neutral. Make it timeless, make it clear, make it non sensational, avoid buzzwords. Um, always make sure that your writing has been clarified once it's done. You know how it is. You start writing something out and you write as you go, and then when you're done, you realize, oh, I've actually written a few things in convoluted ways, and you can straighten that out. So be prepared to rewrite a paragraph a few times if you feel like it, feel like it's necessary. Um, spelling errors shouldn't really occur anymore these days, but if they do, there's always the thesaurus to find out how they're written. Try to write short sentences. I've said it before, but the thing is, this field, research, is inhabited by a lot of pompous putzes who really think that they've got to write to impress. And that's wrong, okay? You don't write to impress when you write about research. You write to explain. And you explain nicely to people who may not have seen this before. Imagine you're writing this for your grandmother. And I'm assuming you like your grandmother, okay? um, let's see if there are any points in there that I might also point out. I mean, you see the list here pretty much. I don't need to read this out for you. Let's move on to the next page. You can always revisit this. This is how the order of contents should be in a thesis that you're writing. So on the title page, you normally put the title of your thesis, and that could be plastic packaging has no bearing on child poverty in Brazil. Your name in full, when you are expecting, well, when your hand-in date is, that's what they mean by date of the award, and which school, department, or faculty you are part of. Some people add their student ID number, not a bad idea. On the second page, you put all this stuff. So you have an abstract. Abstract is no longer than a page. A page, in my opinion, is about 500 words, so it's slightly less than a page. A4, you type it single space, but who knows, your professor might tell you otherwise. But this is a good standard here. You summarize the aims, methods, and outcomes in your abstract. So the abstract states clearly what you were planning to do, how you conducted your research, and what you found out. please keep that in mind. In academic writing, you're not building up tension, okay? You're not writing a novel and you're not writing a magazine article. You don't need to keep your readers on the edges of their seats. No, academic writing is about being totally outspoken and clear and transparent from the word go, and you're writing an abstract so that anybody who opens that page immediately understands the entire scope of what you've done. What you were going to do, how you did it, and what you found out all comes into these 3 words, into these 300 words, okay? Um, that is your service to mankind. And the reason why we do it this way is because your piece will be worked with by other scientists. And if you make your abstract so clear that they get the whole thing, the big picture of what you've done, then they can decide for themselves whether they actually need to go in and read the whole thing or if they can just shut the book and look for something else. You will want this to be done by other scientists so that you can do your work properly, so you do it too. Okay. Then there's the contents page, which should have all the chapters and the subsections of the chapters, all your reference pages, a bibliography, your appendices, and then pagination. You may also have a contents page for the plates, which are the illustrations. And as I've written here, you would normally number these in Roman numerals, and the figures would be in Arabic numerals. So you know the difference between tables and figures, I hope. A table is it's like a spreadsheet, really, and the figure is an illustration. The order of the illustrations is usually classed as a table in your contents page. So you make a table that lists all your illustrations and all the other stuff. You can read that yourselves, right? I mean, it's yours, this presentation here. You may do some acknowledgements. It's always nice to read something flowery, but don't give yourself to any illusions. Even if you thank your tutor profusely, I don't think it's going to affect your mark. We're quite professional about that. That is nice to read anyway. And then here's your introduction. So the introduction is actually not the same as your research plan. The research plan, which you may have written before you started, well, you might be able to use a little bit of it, but your introduction is a different thing. The introduction, confusingly, is something you write when you're done with everything else. The introduction is, I would say the introduction is a slightly more expansive version of the abstract, really. That's what it boils down to. It should explain what you are attempting and why what you have done there as a project is necessary. And you do that by pointing out the problems that were identified in previous studies. So, for example, if you have a pile of studies to do with child poverty in Brazil, and you find out that the main problem is that this was all done in the same city, this was all done in Sao Paulo, but they have absolutely not considered Rio de Janeiro. Well, that is a problem, right? So you say it is necessary to repeat the study in Rio de Janeiro. You will, in your introduction, state and explain all the research methods that you have used rather than to be used, I have to say, because you're writing this when you're done. The introduction should also give an outline of all the chapters and sections and you know why you have chosen to create these chapters and sections. You're describing your overall ambition and how you think what you've created there might be useful and successful. And the introduction is actually written in the future tense because you're writing about pages that are coming at the reader as he keeps leafing through. So keep it to about 5 or 6 pages. That's the introduction, okay? All the different chapters that you're building into your dissertation or report should be numbered and titled. You should also number and title your, or at least title your subsections. And then you have your conclusion. A conclusion is a little more than just a summary, because what it actually does is it reflects on what has happened, what you have done, and what you plan to do in the introduction. So in the introduction, you might have written, it is important and necessary to conduct this research project in Rio de Janeiro because the previous studies only covered Sao Paulo. But now in the conclusion, you may find that the data are so similar between Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro that actually it wasn't really necessary. And you may identify any key issues. You may even reflect on things that didn't go so well. So perhaps you find that your research methods were unsuitable for covering certain things. Yeah, maybe it didn't cover street children who did manage to attend school because they were out of your reach for your interviews, and so on. So look at this page here when you're writing your conclusion. The references. I recommend Harvard referencing, by the way. It's simply something most universities prefer at the moment. It's 2017. Yeah, just follow this outline here for your references. And then there is a bibliography. I can only say look up whatever convention your university wants you to follow for the bibliography, because there are all kinds of different ones. The illustrations need to be dealt with in a certain way. You can put them individually, you can put them at the end. There are many different ways, but if you follow the descriptions here on this page, you should be okay for that. And then there is an appendix. And in the appendix, you put all sorts of other things. Like you might put interview transcripts, statistical data, everything you seriously worked with during your work here, you put there, so that somebody who goes through your work and is trying to imagine how you ticked when you did this can actually get this. Now, a few words on academic writing skills in the end. Writing well academically is a completely different story from writing well as a journalist or writing well as a novelist. It is not the same thing, okay? When we write academically, we write very, very differently. Rule number 1, never use jargon. Like I said before, you don't write to impress anybody. On the contrary, you are writing to explain nicely to people who may have no knowledge, because many of these peer reviewers are actually coming from different areas, so they may not know jargon or short forms or acronyms and things like that. Write nice short sentences. Express yourself like a normal person. Try not to sound like a space alien. And arrange your paragraphs and sections by themes, which you would probably normally do anyway, but just to point out, if you're going to make a paragraph dedicated to a certain aspect. Everything should be titled logically and in a descriptive enough manner to make your reader understand what's going to be in it. You don't want to generate suspense. It's not about that, okay? So you wouldn't entitle your chapter Terrible Suffering, okay? That's wrong. You would title it something like Medical Problems, okay? Yeah, no sensationalism, please. No emotion. No making people sit on the edge of their seats. The construction needs to be clear. I'll let you read this page at your own pace. And it is considered good practice to also reflect on key issues and things that you have written. So I'd say maybe once every other page, put a few sentences in on reflection of what you have so far written. You can do a few things to improve your writing skills. Honestly, I think by the time you're making your way through all the literature, you will see plenty of academic writing. Maybe you'll find one that you really like, and you can emulate that scientist's style in writing. Yeah, find a favorite scientific writer and write like them. I find that it helps not to be too perfectionist while you're writing, because when you're writing, you need to get thoughts on paper, and often it's a multi-layered thing. So just use your raw impulse at first to fill the page, and walk away and refine it later. You can always do that. It doesn't need to be perfect with every single word right away. It only needs to be perfect for every single word at the end. Okay. Now, when you're referencing, there are certain things you can do. You can paraphrase issues, which is much better than quoting directly, which people do, of course, but if you are quoting directly, don't make it too long. It's frowned upon when you have whole paragraphs quoted. That's just not, considered synthesizing at all. That's just considered filling the page and not doing the thinking for your reader. So your reader reads your paper because they want your opinion, not what you have found of other people. Quotations, like I said before, they shouldn't be long. And then in your appendix, all this stuff goes. Like I said before, this is a PowerPoint presentation. You can pause this at any given time, and I think you may even be able to, well, you can definitely use screenshots and keep those handy for when you're writing. Bibliography, all this stuff goes into your bibliography. Your illustrations should have all this attached. Artist, designer, source, blah, blah. And that concludes reporting and evaluating your research. So, now we've dealt with all this theoretical stuff. Where do we start when we are doing a design project? How does research work for us, product designers, industrial designers, other designers? I think you should do something like this. When you're creating a new product, system, or service, you want to know these things here. You want to know the identity of the client, the options for manufacturing that there may be, and then any stakeholders involved. I won't talk you through this now because this is simply a checklist and you would need to work with this anyway. But my recommendation to all design students is if you're going to tackle your design process, work with this kind of thing. And it may boil down to things like what is important to the company? What are they proud of? If a company is proud of something they're doing, you can be pretty sure they will want to keep doing it. Do they have philosophies? If so, make sure your product, system, or service isn't at odds with it. And do they even have a future vision? Most companies do. Most companies have plans and know who they want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Has your client company an interesting history? Usually they do. So look at the products the company has made so far. What are they like? What you will be proposing to them shouldn't be too different from that. Any typical characteristics these products may have that you will want to include in yours so they recognize it as one of theirs. And could it be that there is a famous ancestor among their products that you could build on? Your client company may also have certain needs. They may be aware of market needs that they need to comply with, and they'll tell you if you ask. They will have old established needs, things that they always do. Yeah, for example, if we are saying Hush Puppies, a company that makes shoes and they're famous for not making a noise. Well, that is an old need. Whatever shoe you're designing for Hush Puppies cannot make squeaky noises. And could it be that your client company has inarticulate needs? That means, is there something that your client needs that the client isn't even aware of, but you can see it because you can kind of look into the future? The second thing here, the manufacturing options. What can the company do? Yeah, is this company comfortable blow molding stuff? Great. If that's what they have, well, consider creating some proposals around that because they will be happy to see that they can make it with what they have. Could it be that your client company is quite interested in getting into a different way of making things? Perhaps they want to get out of blow molding and into rotation molding. Find out from them if they'd rather produce with something else. And could it even be that your client's rivals are making better products because they're using better processes? If so, you should be the one who suggests the change. Important here is also the experience and expertise that your client company may have making something. Because if your client has been making things from blow molding for 20 years, you can bet on it. All these technicians are going to be blow molding gods, but they may not know anything else. So perhaps it's pretty clever to leave it at that. And they will be able to tell you all the typical challenges that actually come with this manufacturing technique. So sit down with a piece of paper and let them tell you what goes wrong when blow molding takes place. Make sure that informs your own design proposal because you can avoid the trouble spots, right? Could it be that the company is even famous for making something in a certain way? Yeah, are they perhaps especially good at aluminium polishing? I don't know. If so, make sure you give that a place of honor. They will be happy. Your client will have certain manufacturing needs as well. Depending on where they are, there may be health and safety norms, for example, that need to be complied with. Um, they may only be able to make things of a certain size in their facility, and so on. How quick does it need to be? You need to be quite aware of how long it takes to produce whatever object you're proposing. And yeah, then finally the quality part, but that should be a given. Finally, the people involved, the stakeholders. Could it be that the company and the people in it are dreaming of certain attributes in the new product? People have dreams about the stuff that they make, you know. Ask them, what's your dream of this? What should this be like? Is there something they like so much about the current product that they would be sad to see it go? Ask them about that. Is there something that makes sense that they want, like a rational consideration? I couldn't imagine what it is right now, but perhaps they might even say something, our current product just isn't waterproof. Can you make it waterproof? That makes sense, doesn't it? So that was the company. What will the salespeople want of the product? They are the second line of people who need to be happy. So first of all, if you're a wholesaler or a retailer, you want the product to do certain things. You want it to look amazing on the shelves. You want it to be handled easily by your people. You want it to give you no trouble. Um, you want it to have a long shelf life. You want it to be quite foolproof so that somebody handling it isn't going to break it, and so on. And maybe the current product does this really well. So ask the salespeople what they like about the current product to make sure your product can do that too, or even better. And ask them for any tips, any insight. Maybe they're telling you, every time this box falls down, the edge is dented in. Can you make at least better packaging than this? And then last not least, you've got your consumers who will also have dreams about the new product. Like if they're buying a Volvo, what should the perfect Volvo be like? I'm sure people who buy Volvos dream of new Volvos and what they would be like. And what is the current Volvo like? What would they not want to miss if there's going to be a new one? And should there be something the new Volvo should be able to do that the old Volvo cannot? Okay, so this is research for product designers and industrial designers. I hope you'll find that useful. This sheet here basically says what the previous slides have said in one going. Maybe you could just print that off. And this is me finished on the topic. 1 hour and almost 20 minutes in. I hope you didn't find that too long, but as you know, you can always shorten these things or fast forward them, halt them whenever you like. So all the best with your projects, and I hope you understand research now. You can watch this again if you like. All the best. Bye-bye.